Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
And good afternoon. Dean's going to fix that up. There you go, Dean. Good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. We're flying already, Corrie. I'm Matt Delvecchio, specializing in life transitions, elder care planning, and the senior living industry.
And I'm Corrie Matt, a clinical social worker and psychotherapist specializing in grief and loss.
Coming up on today's show, narcissists. How do you know if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, and what can be done to effectively cope and manage the relationship? So, Corrie, you know what? I know Andy. He's
the farthest thing from a narcissist.
What is the word for the opposite of a narcissist? That's Andy.
Yeah,
that's right.
As you know what, and it takes one to know one, Matt, because you too.
Well, thank you very much.
Fairness.
You know, I wanted to ask you about first day of no masks, and I think you're even going to a play this evening. So, what are your thoughts on going maskless if you are?
So while theoretically it's exciting because it means that more normalcy, if one could call it that. At the same time, I'm not sure I'm ready to chuck the mask entirely. And I believe tonight we still need masks. I think it's as of tonight. I don't anyways, whatever. Anyways, I say you do you, and please everybody be careful. What about you?
Yeah, the same thing. It's I'm looking forward to not having to or being forced to wear a mask. However, as you know, I'm very much involved in the seniors world and always in seniors residences and long-term care centers, and I think that's kind of where you need to draw the line, and especially in those environments or being with your grandmother or your elderly parents. I think we not only have to still wear a mask, not just to protect them, but to respect them, because I could tell you from their perspective, they're still anxious and they're still a little nervous. And so I don't know if seniors in general are quite ready to start going completely maskless. And so let's try to avoid the rolling of the eyes in these situations, because yes, you're protecting them, but it's a big factor is the respect factor, because they may still be nervous and anxious, and we need to respect that.
Fair enough.
Corrie, we also have a very interesting second half of the show. What do we have coming up?
Well, we're going to be discussing some of the challenges faced by caregivers, but really specifically including the feelings of anger. It's no question. It's often a taboo topic, and we don't want to admit that caring for a loved one might be making somebody angry. So I would say that on top of that, even the pandemic itself has only increased the emotions of caring for a loved one. So we're going to be tackling that subject on the second half of the show. Yeah. You really want to stick around for that.
Yeah, I can't wait. We will have Claire Webster talking about that, so experienced in this field. And I think what's going to be interesting here, although the angle is from a caregiver's perspective, it is really about society at large, about why are we so angry. So can't wait. And that's going to come up after the 3:30. All right, Corrie, looking forward to this.
So here we are. What do you do about a narcissistic family member or partner? We're happy to bring in social worker extraordinaire, Yasmine Sikender. Yasmine has a master's degree in social work from McGill University. She's currently involved in her own private counseling practice, and she also creates and delivers webinars on mental health for both private companies and public organizations. Yasmine, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me back.
Always a pleasure. So happy to hear your voice. I want to start, we've discussed this off air, how interesting I find this topic. So I think for our listeners' purposes, I'd like to help us understand narcissism first. Like, what's the main characteristics of a narcissist?
Of course. Yes, this is a word that's becoming more and more popular, it seems, over the last few years. So, narcissism, we all, or I should say most of us, do have certain traits of narcissism. But if we're going to discuss like narcissism as in the clinical sense, a narcissist personality disorder, what it is it's a pattern of grandiosity. Grandiosity meaning an exaggerated sense of one's own importance or power, a need for admiration, very self-centered thinking and behavior, and a lack of empathy for others.
As we're listening, as I was driving in, and I'm sure people today listening in their car saying, I wonder if my partner or my family member is a narcissist. But I also know that people are listening right now saying, gee, am I maybe a narcissist, challenging themselves? So, well, you know what, Yasmine? I believe there are two types of basic types of narcissism. Can you review that for us?
Sure. So, the basic two types, there's grandiose narcissists, and these are people who have, again, an intense need for admiration, a belief in their own uniqueness and superiority, and a very strong sense of entitlement. And then there's also what we call people who are more vulnerable or covert narcissists. So that's also, craving admiration and praise, but in a much more subtle way. So they're often plagued more by feelings of, let's say, inferiority and shame, and they are more likely to want to kind of stay behind the scenes for fear of criticism or rejection. But secretly, they do have many fantasies of grandiosity and fame, etc.
It's so interesting. That's the voice of Yasmine Sikender. She's a social worker, and we're talking about narcissism, and we will talk about it a little later about what to do if you think you have a narcissistic family member or partner. But, Matt's saying he's thinking about, am I? And I'm like, okay, that's Bob. She's describing Frank. Very funny. Anyways, what is this something people are born with, or what causes narcissism?
Well, and that's why, like I had said earlier, we all have certain traits, right? But people who, if it's interfering in their interpersonal relationships, if the pattern of narcissistic behavior is becoming quite intense, and there's this really big lack of empathy for others, then it's considered somewhat, non-functional, right? So according to most recent research, it really originates in childhood as what we call a maladaptive response to an unmet need or trauma. So let me just give an example. If we can understand narcissism as, this need, this extreme need for admiration, we can hypothesize that somebody who maybe felt very neglected as a child might have a higher likelihood of having that exaggerated need for attention later in life. So, unfortunately, those who may have been the subject of neglect or physical or sexual abuse during childhood may have a higher likelihood of developing this personality disorder later on in adulthood.
Yasmine, it is interesting, and I think people make the assumption, me included, that narcissists are they are not happy people. They are miserable people, and there's something wrong with them. However, there's a train of thought, and this is why I wanted to ask you this: are narcissists happy, and can they be happy?
And that's a great question, because I think deep down inside, they're not. There's a lot of suffering there. Mm-hmm. Can they be happy? I think I think everyone does have the ability to have more satisfaction and happiness in their lives if they get the appropriate help or treatment that they need. But in general, somebody with this kind of personality disorder might actually project a very charming, very outgoing, certain kind of personality, and they might actually seem that way, but deep down inside, there's quite a vulnerability there. There's quite a deep, fragile self, which is quite very unhappy, unfortunately.
I'm just curious, do narcissists know they're narcissists?
That's a good question. I'm sure some might, but one of the main, defining characteristics of narcissists is there's a difficulty accepting constructive feedback or criticism. So if somebody has difficulty being really introspective and looking within themselves and trying to be as objective as possible. That's something that could be very difficult for a narcissist to do. So with that said, there might be a lot of difficulty, Corrie, actually, for somebody who's living with this to be able to identify that.
Absolutely. Yasmine, we have so many more questions. Such an intriguing topic, including, what to do about a narcissistic family member and how to effectively emotionally distance yourself from a narcissist.
Roll your soul through every open door. Count your blessings to find what you look for.
From Rehearse, I'm Corrie Serrato with Matt Del Vecchio, and we are talking with Yasmine Sikender, a social worker. She's sharing some really important information about understanding narcissism, if I can only say the word, and what to do about a narcissistic family member or partner. So that is the question of the day, Yasmine. What can we do? Are there ways that we can emotionally distance ourselves from a narcissist?
There definitely is. It's not easy, as I'm sure many people know. But yeah, there are certain strategies, and trying to emotionally distance yourself is really about creating a certain sense of detachment from the event or the person so that it can help you gain perspective and control over your emotional responses, right? So the goal is you want to be able to respond, not react, not go from 0 to 8 in 1 second flat. So I would say the first one, which is very much a mindful kind of technique, is to really be aware of your breathing. It really helps to ground yourself and disengage a little bit. Slow, deep breaths if you feel yourself getting worked up because of something that's happening while interacting with this person. And also, it's important to know your triggers. We all have them, right? We all have sensitive spots, certain buttons that if they're pushed, it really irks us. When dealing with somebody who has this personality disorder, they oftentimes will know what those triggers are and may, unfortunately, push them deliberately. So know what your triggers are. It helps to reduce the power that person has over your emotional responses, and it helps you become more emotionally aware. Understand what narcissism is, like we're talking about today. It kind of helps separate the person from the behavior, and really start to create some boundaries for yourself. Say to yourself, okay, I'm going to this event, or we're going to go here. If something happens and things escalate and there's shouting or swearing, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to leave the room. So really try and, create those self-care boundaries for yourself. And lastly, especially if they feel it's their parent, try not to look to them for their approval or validation. It can be a difficult thing to do, but really try not to look for approval or validation, because that could be a lose-lose situation, which can leave people with very, very hurt feelings,
Absolutely.
And at the end of it all, if these strategies aren't helping enough, then unfortunately the best thing is to limit your exposure as much as possible based on how your feelings and your needs are at that moment.
Listening to Life Unrehearsed. That's the voice of social worker Yasmine Sikender. We're talking about narcissism and what to do about a narcissistic family member or partner. Boy, oh boy, we've struck a chord. The texts are coming in, Yasmine, left and right. And the last point that you just mentioned is, you do have to distance yourself, and some of the texts coming in are doing exactly that. All right. Now, I'd like to know, what should we do about a narcissistic family member? You just talked about emotionally distancing yourselves from them. What else can be done, Yasmine?
Depending on the nature of your relationship and how you think it might go down, you can always try and speak to them about their behavior. Obviously, coming from a place that's not accusatory, right? If it's always important to try and come from a neutral place when we're dealing with anybody. But maybe trying to point out to them the effect that their behavior is having, really separating the person from the behavior, so that they're not too defensive, asking a lot of clarifying questions, maybe to try and help increase their awareness of what the effects are of the drama that's happening, or the increased conflicts that keep happening. That's something that you can try. If it's your partner whom you love very much, you can always try to go for couples counseling if your partner is open to that. So those are a few things that you can try.
So on that line of thinking, I'm just curious, and I won't hold you to it, but can narcissism be cured?
Well, it falls under as a personality disorder, and according to the most recent research, personality disorders, they can be managed.
Okay.
Can they be cured? I think that's yet to be seen, but I think they can be managed with the right treatment, with the right interventions, whether it be a specific therapy or counseling, or if there's a need for other kinds of treatment based on if they're dealing with a lot of anxiety or depression as well. Because oftentimes people with this personality disorder, their relationships suffer a lot. So there's a kind of domino effect, right? If your relationships suffer a lot, you might have more of a chance of experiencing anxiety or depression because you're more isolated, or there's more conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe trying to manage it might be more optimistic than saying a cure, but I wish I could say yes.
Right.
Yasmine, you talk about the relationship, and because of narcissists, as you've mentioned, more self-centered, intense need for admiration, would you think that narcissists are more likely to cheat on their partner?
That's a good question, and according to certain research, unfortunately, the answer leans more towards yes. Mostly, that's not to say that's the case in every situation, obviously, but studies show that people who are narcissists are likely to have commitment issues, which can lead to relationship problems, relationship dissatisfaction, which can lead to cheating. So, as we know, relationships, they require compromise, adjustment, a willingness to learn and grow together. And if your partner is unable to compromise and do these things, then there's an increased likelihood of dissatisfaction, which would increase the likelihood of cheating. Yeah.
Scary thought, but important to understand. I know that narcissists are also master manipulators. It's one of their qualities that I have come to understand. That said, are narcissists more successful than others?
A lot of the consensus says yes, but that's, it's a bit of a misconception. So I think, there's certain traits of narcissism which can lead to an initial success, having a very strong drive to succeed, being extremely ambitious, and of course if somebody has these qualities, it doesn't mean they have a personality disorder, but people with narcissistic personality disorder can maybe initially achieve a lot of success if these traits are very prominent in their personality, depending on the sector that they work in. But often the ability to succeed any further or to sustain it is low. The reason being that, I'll give you an example. They say that the majority of successful CEOs are actually characterized by humility and not narcissistic traits. So having a modest view of one's importance. And as we know, good leadership and success often requires being able to accept negative feedback and learning from your mistakes so that you evolve. And that is something that people who are narcissists have difficulty integrating. Right. And their lack of empathy as well can start to pose a problem with regards to their interpersonal relationships.
Right.
So
Right.
it can be quite sensitive. How far somebody can go success-wise can be limited.
Right. Yasmine, we could go on and on. We're going to have to get you back. Such an intriguing topic. I think a lot of people can relate because they're challenged as well. We